What's up, everyone? How are we all doing today? Welcome to the final week of this Demystifying series where I've been talking about substance creative workflows. I'm joined with Dustin, Ian, and Nick. How's it going, guys?
Not too bad. Happy Monday. Hi, everyone.
Hey, buddy.
Yep. Happy Monday. What's going on, everyone?
Yes. So substance workflows. Let me quickly just add my screen and we can talk about a few housekeeping things before we get into the cool stuff we're going to be doing today. So if you ever want to find out about the events that we have live and streams going on, just head over to this page here, which is the events page on the maxon.net website, and you can see all the live events, all the streams that you have across the whole board here at Maxon, you know, whether it's Cinema 4D and Redshift, whether it's ZBrush or Red Giant, all the tools. And if you ever miss any of these sessions, they all get recorded, so don't worry, we've got you covered. Head over to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. Here's where you can see all of our live streams, all the recordings, quick tips, learn something new. And they're all timestamped thanks to the amazing Sassy. So thank you, Sassy. I always like to thank him because sometimes we go on for like an hour and a half to 2 hours, and he's very kind enough to sit there and timestamp things for us. So we appreciate it very much.
Yep. Cheers. Cheers.
Yes. Also, a quick reminder and a quick kind of a thank you to you guys as a great community. We like to give away free t-shirts. I say free, all you have to do is pay for shipping. The links should be in the chat now, and there is a special password which will also be in there, which is ZBrush and Substance, I believe. So yeah, grab yourselves a t-shirt. All you have to do, pay for shipping. Varies depending on where you live. So today we're joined with Nick from the Adobe Substance team, and he's been kind enough to go through some really cool techniques on some footwear. But first of all, I do want to quickly hand over to Ian, who's going to tease a little bit about what we're going to cover on the July 13th, Ask the Trainer. What we like to do sometimes the next month, we like to hijack Ask the Trainer and do a recap from the previous DPP. And so, Ian, do you want to do a little tease?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, share my screen. So I took my kids to the Mario World, and I was inspired as well. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be showcasing how to make this cube from start to finish using ZBrush, moving it into Substance Painter, and then possibly some little Redshift finals at the end. So definitely keep an eye on that. If you're interested in this whole workflow, since this whole month was about like this workflow specifically, going in from ZBrush, doing stuff in Substance Painter, and then finishing off with a render, we thought, let's do a little workshop of something that's fun, simple enough to kind of wrap your head around it, but gives you all the information you need to go through and actually do the process yourself. And of course, we'll always share the file assets as well. But if you would like to come and follow along, and also if you're new to ZBrush, like brand new, this is perfect for that because you're going to be able to actually go through, do some hard surface, a little bit of ZBrush and some nice Boolean action, a little bit of ray mesh, and then from there we'll move on over to Substance. So this will be a really great, fun, beginner-friendly to even intermediate-friendly course. So you're going to want to follow along with this as well. So again, that's July 13th. So you're going to want to join me and Elly, if Elly's going to be there. Elly, you going to be there?
Oh, absolutely, I'll be there.
Perfect.
Wouldn't miss it.
Awesome. So definitely join us for that, but wanted to sneak peek what we have going on behind the scenes. And so super excited.
Cool. So yeah, with that, we can hand over to you, Nick. If you could quickly share your screen, I can then add that onto the stream. And yeah, what are we gonna be talking about?
Yeah, so today I'm going to cover, compared to when I first hopped on the stream 2 weeks ago, I had that bike model that was pretty much finished, and so I just walked through an overview of how things worked. So here I'm going to start off with a finalized model in ZBrush, and I can switch my screen there to ZBrush. So we're going to start here in ZBrush. The model itself is finalized, but I'm going to bring it into Painter, and then from Painter, it's going to be more of a follow along where I'm going to start from scratch. The app is brand new, like freshly opened. So I'm going to talk about how to bring the model in, how to do some setup, prep work into it, baking the low and high poly meshes together, and then kind of creating the materials for the model itself. So just going to talk lightly about the model here in ZBrush. So this was just a personal project, a demo show to use for some workshops coming up that I'm kind of hosting. So I had to prep a model for that. So this is one of the relatively simple model. I have about 9 or 10 pieces here. like midsole. The outsole itself is actually blank because we're going to use displacement maps to create the texture, which I'll showcase in Painter in a bit. But relatively simple model, just so the students and people in the workshop don't get overwhelmed with like a really complex shoe or a complex model like that bike I had last week that had probably like 30 pieces in it. So the model itself, actually, if you're unfamiliar with footwear design, like traditional footwear itself, all of your shoes, like the ones you get from Nike, Adidas, etc., like they're all built off of what's called a last. So this last in manufacturing terms, it's actually a plastic mold that they wrap the fabric around, and then they attach the sole to the shoe, and then they take the last out. So it actually gives your shoe the form. So when you're designing footwear, you actually want to have a last to reference to actually make sure that your designs actually match the manufacturing spec when you're actually doing proper physical footwear modeling, or footwear design, I should say. So in this model itself, what I did is I had a last that I've used in the past, and to kind of create all the components, it's actually just did a really quick process. I'm sure probably Ian's covered this in demos before, but let's do a little nicer cut there. But for most of the pieces on this model, I just did a simple mask, and over here in the subtools, extract. So just a simple mask, and then the extract here, and this is a little bit thick there, but it gives me all of those base forms I can go ahead and clean up later with like a quick ZV mesh, maybe smooth all those edges out, use some polish tools to kind of get nice clean edges. But this process of masking that last out and then extracting was how I made basically the entire shoe except for the sole. The sole itself was done with the Z Modeler tool, which I think we can save for a live stream in the feature there to kind of go through that. It's a little bit of time to kind of get that set up just the right way. So in this model itself, I have a high poly and a low poly version. The high poly just has a bunch of sharper edges. You can kind of see here that some of the deformation here is a little bit soft. This is the lower quality model. And the high poly have like nice sharp creases there. I have some like deformation here actually in this mudguard component as well. And sharper edges, a little bit more detail in the midsole. But I'm going to bake those in Painter here in just a second. So let me get rid of that last there so it's not kind of clipping through. So the last thing I did, just to kind of make sure that my kind of work was nice and clean when I bring into the Painter, was I made sure when I created the UV maps, which you can kind of see over here, when I prepped the file, I wanted to have like nice, clean UV maps to work off of. And so this kind of pattern, this kind of shape in footwear design terms, it's called a shell. So this is kind of the base upper fabric that you'd have, if you're working as a designer at, those companies I was mentioning before, and you'd kind of draw out your patterns, like where you want perp patterns, or you want like any additional TPU overlays, like other types of effects that you want on the shoe itself. So I wanted to have nice kind of clean UV maps. So the way I went about that is for most of the pieces here, just a simple mask and then polygroup those together, and then UV unwrapped by polygroups. So just something nice and quick, just to give me some nice clean shell pieces. And all the pieces on my shoe here, if you take a look at them, pretty much done the same way. Just mask, polygroup, and then unwrapped by unwrapped by polygroups there. So with that, the model is kind of prepped and finished here. We're going to move over to Painter. So in Painter itself, this is where I'm going to start completely from scratch. Everybody can follow along here if they would like to, or kind of like feel free to ask any questions too. I'm kind of talking through fast, and Elly and Ian, feel free to stop me at any time. But here in Painter, I'm going to go up to File and New. And if you're just coming into Painter for the first time, to start off any project, you need to bring in a 3D model to start off with. Otherwise, Painter's, you can't really do much with it at all. So here in Project, the very top here in Template, I'm just going to choose this PBR metallic roughness. It's a good standard one to kind of work with here. There's a bunch of other templates to start off from, but we're just going to start with this PBR one. Here in the file, I'm going to load up that model. So I have my low quality model and my high quality model. So I'll showcase how to bake those in just a second. But I'm going to grab that low quality one. And then this option here, what this is asking you, this document resolution, that's asking you for the initial quality of the textures as you start to work. You can always change this later, depending on your computer. You might want to adjust these settings. But right now, I'm going to leave it at a 2K file just so I can get a nice representation of my materials without it being like a 4K file, and it's super heavy on my computer. And the last thing here under auto unwrap, I'm going to turn that off because I have those UV maps already created in ZBrush. So I don't want Painter to go and auto unwrap. It's a nice feature to have, but when I want precise clean forms, auto unwrap will kind of just do a brute force method and kind of cut things in half, which we don't necessarily want all the time. So here in Painter, for those of you just hopping in for the first time and seeing this, left-hand side is your 3D viewport, right-hand side is your 2D or your UV maps here. And here's all the components of my texture set, my layers, and then all my materials that I have. So before I start to go along, what I want to do is I want to bake that high quality mesh into the low quality one. Because you can see here in this low quality, like I have these curves and these arches here on my shoe, but they're not really well defined. If I adjust the lighting over there, it looks more like a mistake than intentional. So to bake my high quality in with my low quality one, over here in the texture set settings, I'm going to go scroll down here to bake mesh maps. And this is where I can bake a high poly mesh into the low poly mesh. So I'm going to stick with that 2K output size here. And down here where it says high definition meshes, this is where I'm going to bring in that high quality mesh. And here I need to make a couple adjustments because if I try to bake this out, I'm going to get some artifacts and some odd issues with especially the ambient occlusion one. It's going to be pretty obvious here. So I want to decrease this max focal length until I start to see some of these issues here. So I can adjust that out a little bit. And then the last thing I want to do just to kind of help ease some of these issues that I'm kind of seeing is underneath match, I'm going to tell it to match by mesh name. I also don't need my ID map for this quick little demo. And I think that'll be good here. So what this is going to do, it's going to take that high poly mesh, bake it into low poly one. I'm actually just going to bump up the ray bounces for all the samples for the ambient occlusion, curvature, and thickness. And then I'm going to go ahead and bake the high quality into low quality one here. So while this is working, can take any questions, or if Ian and Elly, you want to chat about anything? But we're going to kind of be sitting here for about 2 minutes here.
No, so far so good. No real questions, but we'll definitely just wanted to highlight a couple things. People are excited for the hard surface workshop, ZBrush Substance, which is cool, and also too, Aria. They got their first job as a 3D artist, so congratulations! That's freaking awesome.
Congrats!
Yeah, congratulations! I saw that earlier. I didn't want to cut everybody off. Good times.
But
yeah, let us know if you do have any questions for any of the guys here or anything that Nick's showing. Then yeah, just pop in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them live.
Mm-hmm. And actually, this would be a good time while it's baking. Is there any colorway that anybody wants to see? Do you want to do any particular colors that we want to see on the shoe?
I'm a fan of orange. That's my first pick.
Do orange? Do we want the second orange in the secondary color, or just all orange?
What do you guys think?
I'm like a huge fan of like the beige and neutrals that are going on. Like I love a little beige. Like my whole wardrobe is full of it for summer. So any kind of beige or mid brown that goes with an orange, I'm here for it.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do like a kind of beige and orange, like orange highlights with like beige for the kind of majority of it here. That sounds pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah. First major question: is this a specific shoe? What kind of shoe are you making, or have made?
No, this is kind of like inspired by some of the Nike kind of running shoes, but this shoe itself was just something I've made for demos that I run in some of my workshops. So this was just something I kind of created from a quick sketch that I had, but no specific shoe from any brands or manufacturer.
Very, very cool. Very, very cool.
Cool. So yeah, now you can see after I baked that high poly mesh into low poly one, those kind of areas I was kind of pointing out where it just looked soft and like not very well defined. Now we're getting a lot of that kind of sharp creases in there. So now it looks like intentional marks through the kind of upper panels here and this midsole here. A little bit of artifacting, kind of clean up that ambient occlusion with another bake later. But let's just kind of move on for the next steps here.
Ooh, actually, here really quick. Sorry. real quick. Today I started. So the question is from Entertainment Jerk. Today I started with Substance and was first day. I faced a lot of shading issues in low poly. What tips would you give before importing low poly into Substance?
I think it'd be hard to tell like what the kind of challenges that he had were with the shading issues that they're mentioning. Is there a way that they could elaborate a bit more on kind of issues they're facing?
Yeah, if they can elaborate more, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And then the second question that came in so far is, when you export from Substance, what's the best setting with the textures for animating in 3ds Max?
Oh, animating textures. So actually, animating textures I can talk about, but I actually use Cinema 4D for that. I have, so to be honest, I haven't used 3ds Max since 2008. It's been a very long time since I've opened up 3ds Max, so I'm unfortunately can't able to help there. The one thing I can say is that most of the 3D engines like 3ds Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, they should have a Substance engine. So that's kind of a kind of asset manager for Substance materials in each of those programs. And I think I might need to throw something on. So I'm just going to throw one material on just so it actually works properly. When you go in, so you finish up your model in Painter, when you go over here to File and Export Textures, you can change the output type. If you go down here, it's hidden towards the bottom. There should be one for, where did they put it in? No, they added it in and then they moved it around a little bit. There should be one for exporting, file type. If you click on file type and go to the very bottom, there's this SBSAR file type. This SBSAR is a Substance standard file type. So what this gets you when you bring it into C4D, or I would assume heavily that 3ds should have it. Half the team that I work with has or uses 3ds Max. But the SBSAR is the native Substance file type. So all the parameters, all the adjustments, everything that you're going to see me demo here in a second, those will be editable with this SBSAR file type. So this is how, if I was to bring this into C4D, I would export out as the SBSAR, then have all those controls that can animate those in C4D myself.
Awesome.
Cool. So let's kind of take a step back here. So for the shoe, I already have a couple of materials already loaded up into here. So we'll demo those, but just to kind of showcase here, over in the Creative Cloud desktop app, in the Stock and Marketplace side, there's this 3D option. And this 3D option has all of the Substance materials. Also show the website in just a moment. But any of these materials, the reason why I like using the desktop app is if I search for something like, maybe I want to use a leather material, for instance. If I find something that I like maybe we can do something interesting with, we'll describe this first one just for demo's sake. Maybe I find something interesting with this rectangular mesh. In the desktop app, I can send to the app and I can send it right into Painter itself. So if I find a material that I like and I want to use, I can click on that send to, and that material will just appear right in my library. So It's a really quick way to like grab materials. And if you had kind of looked here in the materials, there's 11,000 materials to work with directly. So pretty much if I need something, I can just click open the app, find a material, and click that send to, and then it instantly pops right back into my model here. Quick best way, and that's how I kind of brought all these materials in. If you're seeing a lot of them there, was that same process you just saw. So I'm going to sort my library out over here. Down here is the library. It's all the materials I have access to. I'm going to use my assets because I know I have a few that I want to use already. It's going to move the little stream icon.
You can actually click to hide that, and it will disappear.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I didn't know if that was kind of stuck on the screen or if it would stop streaming there.
No, you're good.
Cool. I have a couple materials I already want to use. So here we have this polyester I can drag and drop here. And because I had those UV maps created, I pretty much drag and drop. The material looks really good right out of the box. I can scale it down a little bit here in the UV viewport. And then all of my changes here, I'm going to kind of cover up that texture set settings. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner is properties. And this is where I can make all the changes to the materials that I would need to. So for instance, I can change the color of that material. I can change various attributes like its roughness. If I want to have a glossy finish to it, for instance, I could do that. This one's a fairly limited material, but I'll kind of showcase some of the materials here in just a second that have a lot more properties we could change. So here, let's see. Actually, you know what? I kind of don't mind. Like if we're talking about beige, like this is kind of a nice, maybe a little bit more warmth to it. This might be a good starting beige. We can always adjust this later. And what I can also do too is, as I have this color hue window picked out, I can go down here to my swatches and add whatever I have selected as a swatch. So now I can reference that exact same hue for any other materials as I'm going through the shoe itself. Can search for a suede. Pretty much, at least for this initial starting point, it's finding materials, dragging and dropping them onto the form, and then kind of making a few adjustments throughout here. See what kind of orange we have. A couple of oranges there. Be a nice little pop of color. And let's see here. Adjust my sense here. That'll be the next kind of steps here for just dragging and dropping, kind of applying materials throughout. But before, so just so we're kind of not staying on the same talking points here, I'm going to move to one other kind of interesting thing that we can get into. So I would go through, I'd apply materials, drag and drop them on, adjust the colors here. But let's say I want to do some unique effects. Like maybe I don't want this suede here to be all orange. Like it's a little too prominent. If we only want it to be a pop of color, maybe we want it to have like a gradient fade, for instance. So what I can do is in any of my layers here, I can go ahead and add a mask. And so for those of you new to using masks, pretty much what they do is a mask reveals the material beneath, but it doesn't delete it or erase it. So you can see here my layer stack, I have this left hand icon and the right hand one. The right hand is that mask. So as I paint through here, it's really, really tiny on the screen, but it's kind of adding in different kind of color values there. That shows me what I can show and reveal. But this right or left hand one, if I go and click on that, I have control over that base material and I can make any changes that I want. And it keeps that mask intact. So it's only revealing where I want that material to be. We can delete that mask for just a second. So that's a quick way of working with masks. But if I wanted to do a gradient fade, for instance, I could have two instances of that suede. So I can have that beige color of suede and then that orange color pop. I can add a mask onto that beige colorway. And in Painter, there's this operation called generators. What generators are, they take those mesh maps I created. So when I baked this model, I created mesh maps, for instance, like ambient occlusion, position maps, thickness. And these generators will take advantage of these mesh maps and the data that they provide to create unique effects. So this generator one, if I click on here, there's this option for 3D linear gradients. What this 3D linear gradient does is it creates a mask based off of the position data of the model. So here I can tell the model, sorry, the generator here, that I want my mask to start here in the toe, and I want it to end here in the heel. And the way I do that is I grab these little eyedropper tools and I select the color position or the color associated with that position map. When I switch back to my material option by default, you can see that now we have that gradient applied to that piece there. What's also nice with this tool is I can adjust the balance. So if I want more orange, I can have that be more orange, or I can adjust it so there's only a little pop of orange. And if I want to invert, I can just click on this option for invert and then flip that around.
That's so cool. That's a game changer for me.
There's so many, like it's this one, to be honest, is one of my favorites because just doing nice gradients is like, I love gradient patterns. Yeah. So having that ability is super nice because I can always go back through, and as I was kind of mentioned before, let's say for whatever reason, okay, we don't want to do orange, or maybe we want to do like that purple that I had before, or a blue. I can always go back to my other materials and just swap them out really quickly. So this saves so much time instead of having to go repaint the gradients over and over again to be like blue, no purple, no whatever. It's just set up here that I can make changes really, really quick.
Yeah, that's super awesome. We do have a few questions coming in. One of them I'll go ahead and answer real quick. And we'll share a link here in a little bit too to kind of help answer that question. But it's about unwrapping UVs in ZBrush and basically saying, do you have any tips for unwrapping UVs in ZBrush? Also, what kind of objects do you decide to unwrap in ZBrush when making game assets? So I'm going to cover a lot of that and what we had teased in the beginning. But there will be a link that we'll drop in the chat, which is in 2023, there's a new way to do UV unwrap in ZBrush, which is utilizing the creased edge. So you will be able to use the modeler or even use crease by polygroups and actually select where you want your UV cuts to be utilizing the creased edge. So go ahead and check that out as well, because we did a demo of that when that was released about 5 months ago. So that will be a really good one for that. And then, Nick, I'm sure you'll get to this part here, but it looks like it's a color matching question, which is any idea how to make the same light settings and colors for Maya to be the same that you're working on in Substance. This person seems to be struggle color matching, but I know there's ways that you can go about and actually do your color setting. So any tips on that?
Yeah, here, I can actually showcase that right now.
Perfect.
So when I first, for this demo, I kind of started off by just brought in the model quick just so we can talk about some of the kind of like follow along with Painter. But for those of you who are a little bit more advanced, when you go to File, New, there's a few options on here. And these we can also change later on at the end. But at the very bottom, you should see this color management option here. So when we drop down this, what this color management does is as you bake out these textures for other programs, it keeps working standards consistent depending on kind of what program you're using. The new kind of one we've been using quite a bit is ACE standards, or ACEs, which is I can't remember what the acronym stands for. It's like the Academy of something Sciences. I'm sure somebody's going to correct me in the chat of what exactly ACEs stand for. But it's a kind of a new working standard. So here we can set up a color management profile setting. You can also bring in your own here. So it says preset file. If your studio or your team has a kind of a working standard that they like to use, especially this is more common for like stylized stuff, you can bring in your own preset tools there. And then you can adjust all of the working maps that you're going to have. And then as you export them, what kind of working space you want to be in. So that's kind of one option to keep a little bit more consistency with color management kind of throughout. Because yeah, it's been a big one actually. Cool.
Awesome.
Any other questions I can answer while we're kind of hopping to the next thing?
Nope, I think that's it for now. Very cool. Thank you for answering those. Continue on, sir.
Cool. So let's do a couple more cool effects here before I show off like my favorite tool. We'll save that kind of towards the end here. So for the rest of the shoe here, like for the laces, for like these like little eyelets here, same kind of process. I won't do every single one of them just because it can be kind of a little bit of a rinse and repeat. But pretty much what I would do is I'd find a material that I like. I have my assets here. Maybe I got this like demo woven material. I'll just drag it on, scale it, kind of adjust the size of the material that's represented there. Maybe I want to change the mapping type too, because it looks like there's some like warping there with the UV. So I can always change the projection type from UVs, or I can do triplanar here. And then if it's really bad, I can just go and adjust that out in ZBrush and change that up again. But rinse and repeat for all these other pieces. Something like this, though, like a kind of a large, kind of more prominent piece here. Maybe I want to do something unique, like having a cool pattern or a graphic that's being applied here. So here, let's say I want to do let's do something flashy. Let's do this gold leaf. I just caught my eye and I want to do something shiny on here. So let's say we apply the gold leaf onto here. And in the gold leaf, we can change the color. So let's do that kind of orange copy there. And let's say we don't want it to be kind of this all over repeat, right? Like we want like a cool pattern for that that gold leaf to be associated with. So what I can do for any material is I can go ahead and add a mask. And in the mask option here, it's a little odd, but by default, when you add a mask, your only option to adjust that mask is with the paintbrush. So if you look down here, this properties, this is kind of giving you a hint of like what tools or what actions you have associated with whatever you're doing at any given time. So right now, I can only use my paintbrush. What I want to really do though, is I want to take like a cool pattern like this, and I want to apply it across the form here. So instead of using the paintbrush, over here in this little magic wand looking icon, I can go in and add in this film adjustment layer, and it's going to stack onto the bottom of that mask because I had the mask highlighted and selected at that time. And here I can grab any patterns that I want, drag and drop it into that fill. And what's happening is that pattern that I dragged and dropped into that fill layer is filling the paint bucket that's driving the mask. It's a little bit tricky, especially for people coming in for the first time. But this process allows me to create really cool, unique patterns. And at any time, again, I can kind of click on that first option here, and I still have full control over that material. So if I wanted to change the colorway, or maybe I don't want it to be as, glossy here, I can adjust the roughness values, make it a little bit more matte, for instance. And then any given time, like maybe this pattern, like, okay, this pattern maybe is not working for me. Maybe I want to do something else. I can always go ahead, grab a different pattern, drag and drop it in, and make any adjustments to that.
Nice. No, that's super cool. Going back to that color gradient one, there was a question. Could you use more than 2 colors for that color gradient that you showcased earlier?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, let's hop back into there because there's one little trick you have to do if you're doing more than one color. So let's say we have this fade. I'm going to adjust the fade here on that linear gradient so it's a little bit more orange there, just so I can have a little bit more space for a third color. And I'm going to select that orange color, and it's going to copy and paste that suede material. And I'm going to change it to, let's just do that kind of purple one, for instance, or maybe that blue. This is okay. So what I'll need to do here, I'll need to first do the same setup for that linear gradient. So I'm going to add in a mask, go up here to position, and then add in the generator that's run by that 3D linear gradient. I'll select that toe and the heel. So same setup initially. I'll switch back into material. And so initially, I can adjust that balance. You can kind of see it is actually already fading here between that beige, that orange, and that purple. And we can keep doing this over and over again. But depending on your color and depending on what you're trying to achieve here, one thing to point out is if you're familiar with Photoshop, in Photoshop, next to all of your layers, you have like a different adjustment or kind of blend options. Those are here in Painter as well. So I have this purple suede material selected. Up here, and then blending mode, I can change the blending mode here just like I could in Photoshop. So maybe like color burn is like a favorite. It's not really doing too much here. But maybe you have like a favorite blend mode for your colors that you want to use or kind of play with. Those options are still here in Painter itself. So you can take advantage of that if that's the way you like to work. And then same thing, if you want more and more colors from Infinity P, we could just copy and paste the setup here. Change this to red again. And then take that gradient, kind of lower that balance even more. So we can get as many colors as we want throughout that process. Just kind of rinse and repeat that setup.
Oh, nice. So it's very stackable, and you can send it through each other. So you can start mixing, matching, blending. That's really cool. Yeah.
There's a ton of things you can do with it. It's nice, and I'll showcase one thing when we get to the outsole, which actually we can move on and talk about that now in terms of blending with the gradients, because you can blend not only color but actually height information. So I'm going to move to the outsole here, the bottom of the shoe, and for visual sake, I'm just going to change the environment lighting so it's based off the camera so you can actually see the outsole there. And one thing I pointed out like very early on is like I left the outsole intentionally blank, especially coming out of ZBrush. That's because here in Painter, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my shader settings. I'm going to turn on my displacement settings just so we can see displacement a little bit more. Let's bump the subdivisions up a little bit. In Painter, what you can do for all like your small like macro details, you can paint in height map information. So instead of modeling like an outsole pattern by hand, which can be super tedious, what we could do is something similar to what I was doing with some of those other components on the model itself. I can make a new paint bucket layer. I can turn off all of my channels except for the height information. And if I grab in that same pattern, like maybe I had that cool pattern I had before for that midsole, I can grab in a pattern and have it drive my height map here, which will give me an outsole pattern itself. So one thing to point out is this graphic here has both black and white values. Ideally, I just like to have one or the other. Actually, no, I do have one here. So ideally, I'd have it saved out as a PNG with transparency. Looks like we have one here. So with that PNG to only be driving the areas where I have kind of any values associated with it. But this is nice too for, you know, designing. Whoops, it's a little aggressive. Let's turn down. There we go. This is good for designing different outsole patterns, different traction, or different like, you know, high noise, high frequency textures in anything that you're doing. One thing to point out though is, again, it's kind of clipping through. It's because like this height map, one, I ideally have like something that doesn't have that, you know, just one value associated with it, so it can actually work in just a transparent PNG. But two, just to kind of make things even easier for me to work with, I know I just want it to be on this bottom of the shoe or the outsole. I can apply a mask onto that layer that I had selected. And then on the left-hand side are some of the basic tools we have. So like paintbrush, eraser, and then this fourth option is a polygon fill. And the polygon fill, though, this little checkerboard pattern, this lets me select different parts of my UV map. And I can do that here in the UV, or I can do this in a 3D view. So I can just click on that UV island that I want, and it'll apply that pattern onto just that UV island itself. And again, I probably just need to clean up that texture itself. But that's a quick way to kind of explore, especially for myself, and kind of come from that industrial design background. But even if you're exploring characters or creatures, etc., it's a quick way to explore different patterns and textures. And again, we can always just grab a different map, drag and drop it on. And we don't even need a full map, like a repeat like this. If you have a simple shape, let's go to some project files here. Sorry, all libraries. Even if you have just a simple shape, like a graphic, like here we have just like the simple arrow icon, you can grab in one instance of a shape and then have that repeat really quickly. So this is a really fast way to get some like nice looking materials here. The reason why I'm seeing this jagged edge is because subdivisions are a little bit low. So you can kind of crank that up just for visual sake, but that would just depend on the model asset and then what we're going to be doing at rendering time, how much you want to crank that up by. Cool. And then if there's any other questions, I can answer them now. Otherwise, we can pass it off for the lighting component.
Actually, that's a great segue, because I was just going to ask there was the second part of that question, going back to the color and the aces, but I guess too, I might have missed this, so that was my fault, but more about the lighting matching between Substance and, let's say, Maya, for example. And since we were thinking about passing it off to Dustin, maybe Dustin would be somebody who would want to take this one, but Nick, feel free. If you're feeling it, let me know. Yeah,
I think if Dustin, if that's cool with you, we can pass it off, talk about lighting.
Yeah. We can talk about lighting. Before we get, I have to share my screen. You know, if I learn how to use technology.
That's helpful, just a little bit, buddy. Just a little bit. It's all good.
Yeah. Let me. Oh, this is weird. Okay, it should be. There we go.
It's funny. Going on that question a little bit. So Dustin, maybe you can be like, dude, stop doing this. But I am somebody as an artist who I only focus on the lighting element when I'm ready to composite my final scene. I almost never think about lighting, except for unless I need to like visually see something. Or I'm just like, hey, let me do a really quick, like, test render. Like I'll always test render in Substance, but I'm never really like thinking about lighting until I move into my final scene. You know, so leading into this question, am I doing it wrong, buddy?
No, it's actually I am very much the same way. When I'm doing any type of material creation, usually I'm using a scene that's kind of pre-lit, sort of in my style. Maybe not in Substance specifically, because I'm not a huge Substance user myself. But I'll use something like a shader ball that has a generally kind of dramatic 3-point lighting style setup. And I know that those materials are going to work pretty well in the general workflows that I have. Going specifically from Substance, the way that I would look at it in the few times that I've used Substance in production, it's been using the lighting in Substance to make sure that my material properties look good generally. But once those textures are kicked out and I'm building the shaders in something like Redshift, I'm still tweaking and manipulating those values and things like that, to work best with my lighting. So as a general rule of thumb, kind of the reason why we're segueing into lighting is that aside of the texture creation that you would be doing in something like Substance, I prefer the workflow of focusing on lighting and composition first, and then moving into material creation using your PBR textures, what have you, that you're exporting from Substance. It's a very easy way when you're working with clients to get them trained into seeing something early on and starting to envision your creative process early on, focusing on cameras and lighting, because your lighting is directly going to affect your materials and vice versa. So I like to get the lighting set up first and then build the materials or adjust the materials to work with the lighting that I have, and then move into rendering and post-production. So it's kind of a good workflow, in a client-based system. So with that being said, I've taken the model here that I have from Nick, threw it into Cinema, and for some reason, I like to do this with shoes. I like to go and split them out as if it were some type of ad. We may have to adjust this just a little bit because we can see that it's, kind of hollow on the inside, but we'll see how that all works out as we get going. So, the way that I have this set up, I've been kind of quiet this whole time that, we've been presenting, because I've been throwing a scene together so we can make this happen. So I have a few different bend deformers that are set up here that are very much just, creating slight bends in the shoe. I'm sure that we have plenty of training on using some of that stuff. Elly, I'm sure you've got some stuff on the training team. And if not, there's some great content. So we got that set up. So we have the shoe here. I've started building a basic studio, planning on doing who doesn't love exploded views? Exactly. Everybody loves exploded views, especially when there is fire involved. It makes it even more interesting. So what I've got in the studio is I'm planning, we'll say just like a basic, kind of studio shot, like an infinite room type of deal for this. And then we could obviously get more complicated and so on. So following a bit of what we talked about last week, which was lighting Elly's hamburger or cheeseburger. I like to work with ambient lighting first, and then start to place my, the other like kind of high profile lighting around my subject. So when I'm building an infinite studio, I like to put something like a disk or a plane in there with a Redshift object tag that's going to have the matte properties turned on. Okay. And so from here, I like to take the reflection scale to 1, because we'll say in this shot, we want to have a little bit of the reflection showing on the floor. And then what I do from there is throw just a basic standard material on that disc. And so we can drive a couple different things with this material because it is going to be matted, if you will, like a shadow catcher. So we can also use this floor to somewhat bounce a bit of light in our environment. So the next thing that we're going to do after I have that set up is we can head to the Redshift camera and we can turn the background on, and we'll go to maybe we'll just do like a nice gray background for now. I'm going to save this a moment, and then we can start the render view. There we go. And right now we have nothing in there. So we're seeing the default lighting, which isn't always as great as we'd like it to be. And so what I want to do from here is we'll add in a dome light. There we go. And now we can see some nice ambient lighting. Let's see if I can pull this over. There we go. All right. Now, with the ambient lighting that we have set up, I don't think it's too bad immediately. If we can bring the dome light down into the lighting group here. And what I want to do with the dome light is strictly work with the ambient lighting. So right now there's almost too much ambient light. And so I'm going to bring the value down here a bit. And again, we're just focused right now on the shoe and kind of looking at where some of the darkest points of shadow might be and ensuring that we have a little bit of information there. So we did talk last week about how I like to use HDRIs for this. There is definitely time that I will use something like just a straight color, and that's primarily when I don't want to introduce any other colors into it. So if I were using something like, I think last week we talked about the Grayscale Gorilla Hilton Head Rooftop. It's like one of my favorite HDRIs, or the missile launch facility from Polyhaven, or HDRI Haven. That's a really good one to use as well to give some nice overcast lighting. In this case, I think we can just add values of gray here. And now this is only really going to affect the shoe because we have the background that is being created through the Redshift camera. So what we'll do here is we can turn off background on our dome light, and that's just so we're not seeing anything really competing. I like to have that off, especially in the viewport as I'm starting to move things around. And now we can start to add some lighting here. And so we'll add a new area light. And with this area light, what I'm going to do is use our little arrow here all the way up in the object area. And we can add a target tag. Now inside of this target tag, I already have a light target here that was created. And I can place that light target inside. And so what we talked about last week is how I like to work with rim lights first. So I like to work with ambient lighting, then I go to rim lights, and then I go to the key light. And that's primarily so I can set the kind of darkest or like the black point of the scene first with that ambient light and seeing how everything else is going to work. And then I'll move into the rim lighting to ensure that I have good separation and silhouette before I move on to key lighting. Because especially with a style that I like, a little bit more dramatic, it allows you to really art direct some of that stuff if you have a process that you're starting to follow. So I'm going to be saving here quite a bit as we get going, just a force of habit. Now, with the area light, it's too intense, first of all. So we can drop this, and I'll say something maybe like, we'll start off with 20, and we can adjust from there. So right now, it's directly under our shoe. And so you'll see, like last week, we can actually hide the material manager there. You'll see, like last week, I'm using two different viewports. So the one viewport is currently locked, and that's my Redshift camera viewport here. And then I have another viewport down below that I just changed. I believe it's from from the right side orthographic camera into the perspective. And this is the one where I'm actually going to be able to set up my lighting while seeing it happen or update in the render view. So with our first light here, this is going to be one of our rim lights. And so I'm going to scale this down quite a bit, and we can move it, let that target tag do its job. There we go. And now we can set this light up. We'll say right behind. Maybe we can have a little bit more of a dramatic look. So as I'm starting to move these things around, like the lighting around, what I'm thinking of primarily is not just having light come from the backside of the shoe, but very similar to maybe automotive rendering. I'm looking at the lines and the details that are actually on the product that I'm lighting. So in this case, we have some really cool, details here in the model. And we're not really worrying about any of the Fong tags or anything like that at the moment. So don't don't kill me with that. We would get there a bit more as we're starting to shade this with materials and so on. But what I'm looking at is some of the cool details here. And so I'm trying to place and play with shaping the shadows to best work with the contours of the shoe and highlight a lot of that detail. So there's a couple ways that we can do it. And that's just by starting to work with this light and placing it around almost behind, but where some of this light is actually spilling out over the side. So we can also do this with harder light instead of working with such a soft one. So what I'm going to do is scale the light down a little bit. And of course, as we start to scale it down, we're going to start losing some of the intensity because this light is now not taking up as much of the space. And if we head into our light, we'll drag this down into our lighting group here as well. If we take the light and we start to add a bit more directionality to it, we'll do that with a spread, maybe do something like 0.25. We'll see that our intensity is starting to boost back up because it's throwing all of that light closer to a single direction. And with a spread of 0.25, we still have a little bit of outer spill, but this is going to allow us to really start to capture some of these silhouette details. And then I would adjust this from here. So if 0.25 is a little bit too far down for me, I can bring that to 0.5 and we can see it get a bit softer. And now we can start to move the light off to the side a little bit. And I think maybe if we go a little bit lower, let's see what that looks like.
While you push that just a little bit, Dustin, I need to dip for a little bit. So, well, not for a little bit, for the rest of the stream, unfortunately. So I'll leave you all in good hands with Nick and Elly, of course, and Dustin killing it as always. But I need to take off. So I will catch you guys next time. So just want to say proper cheers and thank you everyone for joining. So continue on, sir. Bye.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thanks. We'll see you later, man. Have a good one.
All right. See ya.
Okay, so with our rim light here, we can see that working pretty well. I do have a little bit more light hitting this bottom sole than I might like, and so we can bring that back up a little bit and start to work with it. There are plenty of reasons. If we take a look here, we can see that the sole's sticking out just a bit further, and it's also going to let a bit more light in. That's totally fine. We can leave this here for now. Now, in order to create a second rim light, what we can do is just duplicate this light. So when I'm duplicating the lights, what I like to do here is start to work not necessarily in the object axis, and we can see that up here. So this is going to be our object axis. If we press W, that's going to switch to our world axis. In most cases, I like to work with the world axis when I'm duplicating my lights. It's just a force of habit, not really any reason to that. It's just it really depends on the setup that I'm using. So in this case, we can hold down the control key and we can duplicate this light over. And now we can start to work with a placement here. And so what I'm doing here is going to have this a little bit more of a true silhouette light, like a true kind of backlight or rim light that's not really cascading light across the front of the shoe, because that's what we're going to have our key light for. And so what I'm going to do is just move this and work with it until we're just getting this nice edge highlight here. And what I think we can also do with this one, we're going to just call this one backlight. There we go. And we'll call the other one rim. right. It's always good to name your stuff so you know exactly what you're working with as you're going. And we can take the backlight and maybe take our spread down to point, we'll just say 125. There we go. And now we can see that we have a really nice silhouette to this. And then if we want to manipulate this and maybe tone that down just a little bit because we like the way that our lighting is working here on the other parts, we can head straight into object in our intensity and maybe bring this to 5. We'll just bring that down quite a bit. So it's not adding a whole lot of light cast on everything else, just a little bit more here towards that front silhouette. And now we can work with the key light. So with the key light, it really depends on what type of lighting you're going for. So like I said, I like to work with a bit more dramatic lighting. That's kind of how we're already setting this up. And we can do things like work with more of a spotlight if we want some really hard light on this, or we can use another area light, which is usually my preference, and set the shape of that light to circle and go that route with it. So what we'll do is just create another area light, and I'm going to take our target tag from one of our others, and we can bring that up, just duplicate it using Control. And now inside of this area light, let's name it key a minute. Inside of this area light, we can head all the way down to shape. Instead of rectangle, we'll go to disk. And then we can scale this light down quite a ways. So remember we were talking last week about real world scale. That's one thing that I often like to use, especially for my key lights. Sometimes I get creative with the rim lights and I just start to throw things in there. If it works, it works. And so in this case here, what I think we can do is start to work a little bit more with a real scale to this. So I'm going to use, we'll say 24 by 24. And we're just going to bring this up and over our shoe. There we go. And it's going to be blown out quite a ways. So we can take our intensity down. We'll do something maybe like 15. There we go. And now if we're wanting to make this light quite a bit harder, we can take our spread down to maybe 0.2. And that's just going to increase our intensity and everything. We've already talked about that quite a bit. But what I'm also going to do is maybe use this a little bit more like a spotlight. So we're just going to scale this down. Here we go. We could even get a little bit closer here. And then remember, we talked last week about how I like to position the key lights. So I do this with almost everything when I'm looking for kind of more dramatic and creative effects. I like to work with like a 45-degree angle off of the view of the camera. So I do have the camera filtered off here. We can turn that back on. And we'll see here that from its current direction, we have a pretty good setup now where our camera's here. We're about 45 degrees off of where that camera is pointed. And so we can start to work with this a little bit. I think going a little bit higher, something more like a top light with this would be good. And then if we're getting quite low with our intensity and we still want to adjust the intensity, the overall intensity of the light, especially when we're working with directional lighting, we can drop our exposure here. And so we'll do maybe like a -1. There we go. And that's showing up pretty well. All right, so at this point now, we have a few things that are happening for us. We have our rim light on the right side. We have our backlight that would generally be creating a good rim for that, a good silhouette on that side. Part of it as to why we're not seeing that is because right now, if I turn off the key light, we have our key light a bit further off to that side. And so what I think we'll do is maybe work with a gobo. So we can use gobos in a few different ways. It really creates nice dramatic or like kind of noir effects. And what we'll do here is grab a gobo texture, and there we go. We can move that over. Let's do something like abstract. Abstract's always interesting. So these textures are from CG Hacks, cghacks.com, if you want to check those out. But I think what we'll do is maybe use a circle texture. So we can use this circle gobo, drag any one of your gobo textures into the color or the texture slot here. Here we go. Make sure we save this a moment. All right. And so now with this being set up, we're going to see everything update here in our viewport. So this is really going to kind of take all of the intensity and drop it a little bit, because now we've placed the texture in that and it's using the texture for the color, which is also affecting the intensity. And so we are going to have to make some adjustments. So I'll set my exposure back to 0. And then I'm going to take the spread here and drop that to 0 as well. And this is going to allow us to really see the effect of the gobo here, because the whole idea of gobos is to use hard light. What I like about Redshift, a lot of times we would use them with, say, spotlights or like Fresnels in photography. But in this case, I'd like to use this with area light so that we can adjust the spread and how hard those shadows are actually affecting our subject or our primary product or object that we're using. So now I can start to bump up our spread here just a bit. Maybe that's going a little bit too slow. There we go. And now we can see here that as I'm doing this, we can really get a nice fall off of the shadows, and you can kind of mix and match different looks here. So in the center is going to be the brightest part, because that's currently the largest spot for the light to come through here with our gobo. And so we can make adjustments to this. So because we're using a small spread, what we will need to do is probably adjust the scale of our light to be able to push this quite a bit, and maybe have it a bit more like a spotlight, to where some of the lighting effects are hitting the ground and so on. We can sort of see that here a little bit. If we pull the render view out, we can see some of the lighting happening there. And now, of course, as we start to scale up our light, we can scale down some of the exposure. And so this is a really easy way to start getting different effects. So as I'm doing this, there are quite a few different times that I'm using a mix of gobos and regular lights, and maybe even other gobos. So this one here was a little bit more abstract. If I head back to the textures here, we can use something like nature and pick any one of these and give us a little bit more kind of stippled lighting instead of just having circles in our shot. And so we'll see that here, where now we're getting some really nice fall offs. And at this point, there we go. Sorry, had my alarm going off. And so at this point, this is really where I would start working on getting some of the materials into this shot and getting everything working well. So after the materials are set, that's normally where I would start to look at the camera effects. So things like bloom and glare. If I want to have, say, some bokeh textures in there that are really creating some nice chromatic bokeh, I would start doing that after my materials are set, which is after the lighting is set, and kind of working in that productive process. It's like progressive as you're getting towards your final rendering state. So do we have any questions so far?
No, I think everyone's just mind blown, really, by just how easy you make it look, but it just isn't. But it looks incredible. I linked to CG Hacks as well whilst you were talking about it, because those
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Lovely.
Yeah,
I have a question, actually.
Maxon DPP. We do have a coupon code for everybody that's like part of the cool streams that we have. Yeah, Maxon DPP 30. But anyway, so go ahead,
Oh,
Elly.
perfect. I'll throw that in. Oh, yeah. So it was just when you go in to adjust your lighting, I noticed that more often than not, you go to the exposure first. Once you've set up the like initial intensity and
Yeah.
your spread, I noticed that you often go to exposure and then do intensity, or sometimes don't. Is there a reason? Is it habit?
Yeah, so it
Just
really
curious.
depends on the lighting that you're using. I always work with intensity first, and as I start to get intensity, like it's kind of weird. So if we'll just set our exposure to back to default at 0. Um, I like to think of exposure as like the brightest, like the hottest highlights that you're getting, things that usually get blown out. And I like to use the intensity. Um, Maybe what we'll do, we'll just set this all back. So I'm going to copy the spread here that I have, and we can right click and reset to default. And we can just reset this to default as well. I won't worry so much about having the Gobo in here. That's totally fine. And oh, that didn't reset to default. Maybe not. Okay, there we go. Boom, 100. It's all the way up there. Okay, so as I'm starting to work with the intensity, the way that I like to do this is intensity first and then exposure. Sometimes I'll actually expose or adjust the exposure once I get my materials built, because I really like to work with that on reflections. And so when my reflections are way too hot, I'll adjust the exposure of the light and keep the intensity the same, just to kind of like bring down some of those the blown out details. Yes. So I'm trying to think of how to best explain this. So intensity, the way that I'd like to work with this is if I get down to something like 10, okay, and that's usually after adjusting the spread. So I think to myself, hey, do I want to have hard or soft light? So the more I adjust the spread, say down to 0, it's going to be a bit harder light. It's just going to be very directional light, we'll say. Hard and soft lighting, shadows. We talked about that a little bit last week. It's all has to do with like the distance of the light source and scale and everything from your subject. We have plenty of streams talking about that in the Demystifying series. But as I start to get something like my spread, maybe we'll just paste in our other value here. So at this point, when we're looking at the shoe, I've already got my intensity at 10. So that's already low. So in order to bring this down, and I will say a big disclaimer here, currently we're not working with materials. Okay. So I'm going to stop a minute and kind of just give everybody a heads up. Usually when I'm working on scene lighting, what I like to do, I didn't do it on this one. What I'd like to do is take a Redshift standard material and head down to the roughness for the reflection. And I like to set that at something like 0.5. And then I'm going to place this right on top of the shoe here that doesn't currently have any material on it. And this is where I'm going to be able to start visualizing some reflections and things like that before I get the materials on. I didn't do that in this case. And in fact, I'm going to delete it. There we go. I didn't do that in this case because I didn't really think it was very necessary. So it's not always necessary. But just know that's usually how I will work. And I'll have, a base kind of neutral gray on products that I know are going to be lighter. I like to use kind of just white because it's going to show me exactly where those white points are at and how hot everything's going to be. So it's really just, kind of on a per case basis. So with that all being said, the key light intensity here, in order to start dropping this even further, right, I'm going to have to get down to these crazy low values, which I don't always need. And so what I like to do is think of like a 5 or 10 kind of like threshold. That's like once I hit, at the very minimum 5, I'm going to start working with exposure and start to bring that down. And so in this case, we could kind of drop that a little bit here. And now we're seeing that we're not really getting any crazy clipping or extreme loss of detail blowouts in that area. You don't always like to go too far. So we'll just say something like -1, and then we can start to tone this down. So there are a couple ways that we can also adjust the intensity of the lighting. So if we know about the inverse square law, we've talked about it in the past, your light intensity is going to drop. The very basics are that the light intensity is going to drop the further away from your subject you move the light. So in this case, if we go ahead and we move the light and kind of double the distance, there we go. We're going to start adjusting that a little bit. It might be a little bit different because I have the spread is way low. There we go. And we'll take this back to default. I feel like I'll never remember these settings. We'll go, I think intensity of 100 is fine. There we go. Okay, so we're back to a little bit closer. I'll actually remove the texture here as well. So when we had our light set really close, we can see that it's blown out. It's a lot easier to see this without all of the other settings that we had in place. So the closer your light's going to get, the brighter it's going to be, right? And we're still working with the intensity of 100, which was initially blowing everything out to begin with. The further away we move our light, the less intensity we're going to have. And so there are different ways that we can adjust the intensity of the light, which is also why I like to use the exposure for certain things like the blown out highlights. And I like to use the intensity to kind of work a bit more with the diffuse lighting. So hopefully that makes sense. These two sliders and the inverse square law of like moving lights further or closer to the subject to adjust the intensity are all things that, you know, if you're thinking like a photographer, you're going to be doing. So hopefully that all makes sense.
No,
Somebody put a yes in the chat if it actually makes sense, or did I just completely confuse everybody?
We'd like a thumbs up from everyone. No, I think that was great. It was a really good explanation.
Yeah. So without, I don't know if we can completely redo everything. Let's see here. Put our spread. I think I still have that value placed. We'll go to a value of 10. There we go. Of 10, -1. And we'll head to this guy, drop this into our texture again. There we go. And that's close enough. So when I'm working, like I said previously, when I'm working with, you know, products like this, it all really has to do with the, you know, the style that you're looking to go for, which is usually directed by a client. If I get to, you know, kind of make the creative calls, I'm usually doing something like this, where I like to set up my rim lights. I like to set up kind of a rim light and a backlight. It all depends. And, you know, in a lot of cases, you know, we call rim lights backlights, vice versa. And I'd like to have a nice key light and maybe experiment with something like Gobos. I'll use HDRI textures in the lights at times to mimic more photographic modifiers, things of that nature. But, you know, getting into the basics of like a cinematic lighting setup, it usually has to do with separation or ambient lighting, separation, and then your key light. So if you kind of think about it in that balance. So one thing that we can talk about here, let's see. So I don't have a gradient set up for the floor yet. So I do like to set up the gradient at times. We can kind of do that very quickly. We can throw our ramp node. Here we go. And we'll plug this. Is this my floor? This is not my floor. Let me copy that. There we go. So into the floor material, I'm going to copy a ramp node, place that in the opacity, and we can go to circular, I believe. There we go. And now we can start to adjust our values so we can invert our gradient and start to crunch our black point here. Is it radial or circular? No, okay, I was right. It is circular. There we go. And so we can get a nice feather of the floor to our background as we're starting to manipulate and drag the points of this ramp in and out. Doesn't always have to be too much. So from here, what I'd like to do is use the floor material color. So our base color here, this can either work as like a bounce, or you can use it as kind of a negative fill the darker you go. So maybe I'll just twirl this down so we can rapidly adjust values here. So if we head back down closer to black, we're going to see that the shadows here right underneath the shoe are getting quite dark. And if we go to something a bit brighter, there we go, it's going to start filling underneath. So with this shoe specifically, because we have it down almost like, a contact point with the floor, it's going to give us a little bit less result in that shadow kind of crease area down there at the bottom. But it is good to note that you can use this for quite a few different things, like a bounce card on the floor as you're starting to get into that space. We can see here on the back, I believe it's the midsole piece. If we go up to white, we're getting quite a bit of bounce, and we're starting to lose some of the contouring that was on the back there. And if we head to something like a black color here in the base color, now we're starting to get some really nice contour on the edge. So using it like a negative fill or a bounce card is definitely going to work in your favor. And then, of course, we can use actual planes as negative fills or bounce cards, kind of using the same method with materials. So I think that's all I have. It's a whole lot of talking.
No, it's great. It was great. There was one quick question that came in from Mohammed. Let me just throw it up on the screen. It was about applying the colors or the textures that Nick did in Substance onto the model in Cinema. And the reason that we haven't done that during this session is because they weren't exported and then given to Dustin, but I'm going to link last week's DPP, which goes through how you would then export those textures or those texture sets from Substance, and then how you can bring them into Cinema 4D and Redshift. So I just wanted to let you know that we saw that comment, but that's why they aren't there in this one. So let me just throw that link in there. If I could spell last week's, there we go. DPP.
So are there any other questions before we head out?
I think those are all of the questions. We had a quick one. So regarding the question that came in about the ACES workflow and having the color management and things like that. Mohammed is wondering about the settings you would need to tweak to make the light the same as it is in Substance to ensure you get that same look.
Yeah, so the lights in Substance, I mean, I can show that really quick. Sure. There's no light creation in Substance itself, unless we're talking about Stager, which is like a quick and easy kind of rendering app. In terms of like lighting environments, which here I can share my screen very quick. In Painter, like if you're working in Painter and you want to kind of change or kind of see what the shoe or any model that you're working on looks like, up here in the top right-hand corner, the display option here, you have this option for environment maps. This is like a series of HDRIs that you can use to kind of visualize the model in different lighting conditions. So you can see here as I pick something that has like this kind of like nighttime kind of sky, like overcast kind of sky. We're picking up all those hues and colors from that HDRI into the model itself. But these maps don't, I mean, you actually can bake these in, which we could talk about in a future live stream, or any HDRIs. But they're not created with the model itself. You're just getting those base materials. So all that lighting that you do something in your other application, whatever you might be using.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was, what I was thinking regarding that question is you focus a little bit more on what you're doing to your materials and your textures and getting those right. There are plenty of HDRIs there so that you can kind of simulate different lighting environments to make sure that maybe you find one that fits more your style, or like for me, I would find one that has a nice key light setup, rim lights already in there, and use that HDRI to create my material set, and just know workflow wise that those textures are then going to work for my general lighting. But as I said, I do use HDRIs mixed with like studio lighting, if you will. And so it's very rare, unless I'm going for something that's maybe hyper realistic outdoors, that I'm going to just rely on an HDRI anyway. And so my thought process is to just use Substance for creating your textures, and then focus on the creative lighting and an art direction in Redshift, Cinema, what have you. So yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, I want to thank both Nick and Dustin for jumping in and just sharing an abundance of knowledge, both in ZBrush, Substance, and of course inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift. And thank you to everyone who has been part of the stream and been asking those great questions. It's been great spending this month with you guys. We've come to the end of this particular series, but that just means a brand new topic for next Monday. So yeah, thank you so much to both of you, and Nick, you can thank Wes for coming in as well. It was great having him on week 2.
Yeah, it was super fun to kind of hang out with everybody here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's always good to be on. Always.
Always good fun. But yeah, I hope you'll have a great rest of your day, rest of your weeks, and I'm sure we'll all see you on another session soon.
Cool, that sounds awesome.
All righty. Bye, everyone.
See everybody.
Bye, everyone.